will officially get started. Hopefully the people on the Zoom can hear. I want to welcome everybody who's here and participating on Zoom. We appreciate you coming out tonight to talk about the private well contamination in Westminster. My name is Mary Chief Pigsley. I'm the Regional Director of the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection's Central Regional Office in Worcester. Central Region, 77 cities and towns in the middle part of the state, including Westminster. I'm going to introduce one of our Deputy Regional Directors. Andrea Briggs is in charge of pretty much everything in our office. She's going to talk about how the program is actually going to run tonight as a hybrid meeting.
Thank you, Mary Jude. I forgot I was doing this part because I got so wrapped up in the Zoom. So I want to thank you all again for coming tonight. For those of you who were not here last year, again, my name is Andrea Briggs, Deputy Regional Director at MassDEP Central Regional Office in Worcester. I'll be moderating tonight's meeting. In addition to the people in the room tonight, we have about 30 people on the Zoom and the numbers climbing slowly. So it is being recorded and it will be posted to MassDEP's website as soon as I'm able to get it formatted. I want to take a brief moment to thank your school district, specifically the superintendent's office, the principal's office here at Oakmont Regional High School, and especially your outstanding AV team. A second year in a row, they have really made this all possible and worked really closely with us to make this hybrid option. We are working, we're going to try very hard to stick to the agenda tonight, leaving time for questions. And we'll hear from DPH, MassDEP, followed by MassDEP. We're hoping that the presentations will answer many of your questions. So that being said, please hold your additional questions that are not answered until the end of the meeting in the Q&A portion when we start that. And that's it. I'm going to turn things over now back to Mary Jude.
So Andrea is one of our Deputy Regional Directors. I want to introduce the two of the other Deputy Regional Directors who are with us tonight. Mark Wally, who is the Director of our Bureau of Waste Site Cleanup, which is what it sounds like, oversees cleanup of hazardous materials and oil sites. And Doug Fine, who is our Deputy Regional Director for the Bureau of Air and Waste, also descriptive, handles permitting of facilities like Mass Natural Fertilizer under the solid waste program. The citizens of Westminster have formed a group and have been working with DEP collaboratively, and it's been super successful and helpful for DEP to have one voice, and that one voice is Deborah Hooper. We met Deborah the very first Board of Health meeting we went to in Westminster, I think in March or even late February of 2022. So Deborah has been on this site pretty much just as long as DEP has been working on the site. So wanted to offer an opportunity to make some remarks, Deborah.
All right, thank you to the residents who are here, to DEP. I just want to take an opportunity to introduce to you Sue Bader. And about 3-4 months ago, an LSP group, an association, came to the residents and asked us if we wanted some help for free to help navigate the situation. So we got a list of names, and a couple of our residents kind of read it through the names, and we thought Sue would absolutely positively be our best fit. And we are thrilled with Sue. She has made so many phone calls and emails on our behalf. So I just wanted to say thank you to Sue. Because she is a full-time LSP, we decided that we didn't want to inundate our email box with emails. So if anyone has any questions for Sue, you can email me, Hooper, HOOPERD 26@gmail.com. And I work full-time as well. So give me a day or two to get it to Sue, give her a couple of days, and we'll try to get back to you as soon as we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. And again, taking on the responsibility of putting together a citizen/neighbors group is really a ton of work, and we very, very much appreciate that. So if you were at this meeting in June of last year or on the Zoom, last year. Some of the information we're going to talk about tonight might sound familiar. We're going to start off with a presentation from the Department of Public Health about PFAS. What are PFAS? How are people exposed to these chemicals? What are some of the possible health effects of exposure? Then I'm going to talk a little bit about the Mass Natural Fertilizer Facility and how MassDEP's regulations apply to that. And then Mark Wally is going to pick up from there and get into some of the detailed information about the investigation of contamination around and at the property. Mark's going to touch on the high points. When I say details, it's the high points, the detail. There's a lot of details. I want to make sure we save time for questions at the end, and we'll be talking about where you can find information if it was not something we were able to cover tonight. We're also going to try hard not to use acronyms, which is very difficult for us, but we're going to try to say the words instead of the alphabet soup. And I hope that's helpful also. And as Andrew said, we're going to try to address questions you might have so that you hear what you need to hear and not have to come up and ask questions because some people aren't comfortable doing that. So I'm going to turn it over to Mark Nascarella from the Department of Public Health.
Hi, good evening. So to reiterate, anytime I'm in a room with Mark Baldy, I'm usually referred to as the other Mark. So that's fine. And if you think of me that way, I'm the person in the room that is from the Department of Public Health. And our role on this site and our role in this kind of community concerns about site-related contamination is to directly address community concerns about health effects of exposure. So what we've prepared is a presentation where I'll sort of walk through what has been my experience in Massachusetts when we go into communities and there's concerns about PFAS exposure. It may or may not be comforting to know that there are other communities in Massachusetts where they are too struggling with some concerns about PFAS. So we've sort of prepared some information that answers the types of questions we've heard over the past several years as state and federal agencies start to investigate where is this PFAS from, what is PFAS, what's it doing to me, what are the sort of resources available to me. So I'll sort of walk through that. But as Mary Jude said, in any conversations involving exposures and potential health effects, I recognize that many of you might have questions that you prefer not asking in a crowded room. So I want you to feel free to come up to me and ask any questions you might have. And more importantly, if you go home and reflect on this, or tonight's not a good night to have that conversation because a lot of stuff is being thrown at you, I want you to feel free to reach out to the health department. We have staff that are trained in having these kind of conversations. We routinely work with state and federal agencies when sort of responding to community concerns about exposures to chemicals like PFAS. So I think we'll jump right into the presentation. There will be some opportunities for questions, but I just wanted to sort of start off by sharing that with all of you. So, thank you.
Was the clicker need to be turned off?
So I'm your state toxicologist, so I'm happy to be here and talking to you about this issue. I want you to note that an email address is on every slide, or at least the first and last slide, and that's where you can reach me or my colleagues if you have any questions. So In terms of a little background and table setting on PFAS, if you're not aware, PFAS are a group of fluorinated organic chemicals that have been used in a number of consumer products for years. They're their physiochemical properties, the reasons why they're used is they're really resistant to things like grease. They make they coat certain surfaces that allows them to repel grease and make them non-stick. They've been used in any number of different industrial applications and consumer applications where you might want to do that, including the sort of wax paper that you might get French fries in at a county fair, wrapping used in popcorn containers, pizza boxes, oil resistant clothing, and they've also been used for years in perhaps most broadly in putting out fires that burn really hot. So chemical fires like chemical fires from jet fuel. There's a product that is formulated with PFAS called aqueous film forming foam. This chemical forms a really dense layer across the fire, and it allows this chemical to suppress fires that sort of burn really hot. So most of the times when we're talking about PFAS and localized site-related contamination in communities in Massachusetts, we're talking to communities that live near airports or near military facilities where aqueous film forming foam is the reason for the PFAS exposures. But what we also know is PFAS has been used in a number of different consumer products. So not everywhere that we see PFAS can we ascribe it to AFFF or any one particular thing. So PFAS is, when found in drinking water, like it has been found here in Westminster, it's typically localized near industrial facilities or where the aqueous film forming foam has been used. What are the other ways you can be exposed to PFAS? Again, I don't know how reassuring this is, but I can tell you if we were to collect blood samples from everybody in this room and measure PFAS levels, virtually everybody in the United States would have measurable levels of PFAS in their body. So almost everybody is exposed to PFAS. Most of us through things like carpeting or fabric coating, ski waxes. A lot of consumer products have low levels of PFAS in them. When we find it at higher levels in drinking water, it's usually not from those sources, but it's from sort of industrial contamination. You all may be aware that there are many thousands of different types of PFAS. Mostly when we're talking about PFAS, what we're talking about are these 6 particular PFAS. And we're talking about these 6 particular PFAS is because they're some of the most extensively studied chemicals. They're chemicals for which we understand levels that are safe and unsafe. And for that reason, this is what informs a lot of regulatory action. This is what drives regulatory agencies to really clean up these 6 levels because we understand so much about them, and it drives some of our policy. They're what we're called risk drivers. We identify these in the environment and we clean up the contamination to remove these. So Massachusetts, in terms of the regulatory landscape, my colleagues in the Department of Environmental Protection have developed safe levels of 6 PFAS in environmental media, including water. MassDEP has determined that there is a level of PFAS for these 6 PFAS that someone could be exposed to every day safely for their entire life. From that value, that level of PFAS exposure that someone could be exposed to every day from their entire life, we make certain estimates about, given all the different ways people are exposed to that chemical in soil, in water, in air, how much of that chemical can be in water that people drink every day. And from that level, MassDEP has determined that the safe level is 20 parts per trillion. So 1 part per trillion is roughly equivalent to a grain of sand in an Olympic-sized swimming. So we use this as a barometer to say, when is water unsafe to drink? And this forms the basis for a lot of notifications that go out and regulatory actions to make sure that individuals are not, over the course of their entire lifetime, being exposed to PFAS that's unsafe. So how can some of these PFAS affect my health? So it depends on a number of different things. So there's really no way anyone credibly can tell you exactly what PFAS in your drinking water right now can do to your health, because it depends on how much PFAS you're being exposed to in that water. It matters how long you've been drinking that particular source. And it depends on your personal health history, your medical condition. And frankly, it also depends on how much PFAS you're getting from other sources. So I described how we know a safe level of PFAS from every media that we're exposed to, a safe level per day. And we've taken some amount of that and said, some of that total exposure can be in drinking water. So we're unable to say exactly if you've drank PFAS, what specifically it will do to you on any one given day. That said, we do know from studies in people who've been exposed to PFAS at high levels for a long time, that PFAS is associated with things like increased cholesterol, decreased antibody response to vaccines in children, increased risk of high blood pressure or preeclampsia during pregnancy, small decreases in birth weight, or increased risk of kidney and testicular cancer. So we know this in humans, mostly from studies in people that have been exposed during occupational activities, work-related activities that expose them to really high levels. I want to point out these things we don't fully understand, or these things we have not come to understand from studies of people exposed to low environmental levels in community water supplies. Those studies are underway now. There are a number of studies across the country, several of them here in Massachusetts, that the federal government is conducting to understand when people are exposed to relatively low levels in water, what is their long-term health effects? These we know from studies in people exposed to really high levels. So can PFAS cause cancer? So US EPA, who is, we consider the authority on if chemicals can cause cancer in environmental media, has stated that in some studies, there's a link between PFOA, one of the specific PFAS, and both kidney and testicular cancer. EPA considers it suggestive that PFAS causes cancer. Again, if someone to definitively answer if PFAS can cause cancer in any one individual, we would have to know a number of things, including how long they were exposed, when they started becoming exposed. I think when I'm asked about this, you know, from my family and people say, well, what do you think? This is a lot of complex information to say, well, maybe PFAS causes cancer in certain circumstances. We can't definitively say if someone is exposed to PFAS that they won't develop cancer from that particular exposure, and we can't definitively say that they can. PFAS is not the only chemical in this category. There's a lot of carcinogens that fall into the same maybe category. So one of the questions that we routinely get is, will I get sick if I drink water above the regulatory value, above that 20 parts per trillion value? So what I like to tell people is it's not a bright line. Just because you drank water that is above that 20 parts per trillion, it does not automatically mean that you're going to get sick. sick, or you should expect to get sick at some point in the future. The regulatory value is set at a really conservative level. Frankly, it assumes that people will drink the exact same water source, 2 liters per day from that same water source every day of their life for 70 years. So if I think about all the ways that's not true for me, is I don't drink 2 liters of water every day from my home tap. And when we consider these sort of regulatory values, we set them that way to be really conservative, because we know that somewhere out there, there is a person that should be able to drink their own water in their home every day of their life for a 70-year life. But when setting these levels, it's very difficult to say if any one of you will have drank a water at that exact same level for 2 years, 2 liters per day. So there's certain considerations that we would need to know, sort of a conversation about the length of exposure, or the duration, the number of years, the magnitude of exposure. Do you drink 2 liters of water every day from the same source? What are some of the other sources of PFAS exposure? So it's very difficult to say to any of you if you should expect specific health effects based on a specific exposure. But what I can tell you is that there is a fair amount of a safety level built in between the regulatory value and a level that would be unsafe for daily consumption. So what should I do if I've been drinking water above the drinking water standard? So what should you do now if you received a notice or you just recently become aware that the water in your home is unsafe to drink? So other than limiting your exposure, the best thing you can do if you get a notice that your water is unsafe is stop drinking the water. So look for other opportunities other places to procure your water. My understanding is that you've all been offered at least clean, fresh water in your homes. You're aware of the risk, and that is the number one most important thing. Sort of stop the exposure. Other than that, there's no recommendation that anyone in this room should present to your primary healthcare provider and explain to them that you've been drinking water for X number of years. And I say that I say that for a couple of reasons. One, if some of you may have had tried to have that conversation with your healthcare provider about previously drinking high levels of a chemical in your water. And we routinely at the health department, I routinely engage clinicians on this issue. And I have 3 medical fellows right now that are working with us on this particular issue, building clinical capacity to understand these types of environmental exposure. And what I hear from clinicians, doctors, like your healthcare providers, when we engage them in this question and try to talk to them about how to have conversations with the public about this, the doctors time and time again say, we treat health effects, we don't treat levels. So there's nothing we can do for a patient if we understand that they've been drinking a certain level of a chemical in water. These patients treat symptoms. So what we think is the best course of action if you know you've been drinking PFAS in your water for any number of years is to stay vigilant during your well visits with your doctors. If you think anything is unusual on that clinical chemistry test that you get from your doctor every year, if you think your cholesterol is not behaving the way it should, if you think you have some unexplained health effects that you've been unable to explain through any other conversations with your doctor, then I think there's an opportunity to explain to them that you've been exposed to PFAS for any number of years. If you're having that conversation with your physician, with your healthcare provider, and they say to you, I don't really understand PFAS, I need some more information, reach out to us. We can put your clinician in contact with an environmental medicine expert that can help explain some of this nuance. I say that because many clinicians, just like probably many of you in this room, didn't know anything about PFAS until you got a letter in your home or you got a reverse 911 or whatever brought you to this table. So I think if that's something that the health department can help do, connect your clinician to some experts in PFAS, we're happy to do that. I also want to point out that there is no specific medical tests or medical exams for PFAS that we would recommend. And I think if there's a sort of diagnostic test that your clinician is interested in talking to some of our medical staff about, we can certainly set you up and you can have that conversation. But I think a lot of people come to these meetings, or in the past anyways, asking if there's a specific medical test that they should talk to their doctor about after knowing they've been exposed to PFAS, and there is not. So many people also want to know if they would know PFAS was in their drinking. Would their water be discolored, or would they taste it? And in fact, they wouldn't. Water testing is the only way to know if PFAS is in your water. You can't tell it by taste or smell or look. PFAS levels can certainly differ depending on where your water is sourced in the community. So from well to well, but many of you, I think, know that at this point. If your water has elevated levels of PFAS and you are drinking bottled water, the health department in Massachusetts regulates bottled water providers. So any one of you, if you're interested in knowing, well, how do I know the bottled water I've purchased or I've been given has also been tested for PFAS, and I'm not just exchanging one problem for another. You can look up your bottled water provider online at the Department of Public Health to identify what the specific brand is, what the specific make is. And if it's on our list, that water has been tested for PFAS and it's regulated by the health department. You can see those records. So some of you might have questions about pregnancy, or might have questions about nursing and PFAS exposure. So right now, regardless of the level of PFAS exposure, regardless of the level in your water, previous levels, or frankly, even current levels, the current recommendation for women that are nursing is to continue to nurse regardless of your current or past PFAS exposure. In many communities, that is also a question. Women that are nursing have concerns about passing along PFAS to their children. The current medical consensus by the American Academy of Pediatrics and the American Academy of Obstetricians and Gynecologists is that the risks of not breastfeeding far outweigh the risks of potential PFAS exposure to children. So said differently, the benefits of nursing and breastfeeding provides tremendous benefits to the child that would not be outweighed by the risks of PFAS. Because PFAS exposure is associated with preeclampsia, it's worthwhile to have a conversation with your clinician about regularly checking your blood pressure. That's routine during well visits for pregnant women. So there's no recommendation to sort of supplement that, but it's certainly worthwhile to underscore that if you or someone in your family is pregnant, continue to monitor that. So I guess I skipped forward in that previous slide. So again, if you have concerns about nursing and breastfeeding, certainly contact your medical care provider. And if your medical care provider has questions about this, again, this is an area that we can connect you with environmental medicine experts to have a conversation about. So sometimes we get questions about other uses of the water in the home. So we recognize that a lot of people with the water in your home use it for reasons other than just drinking, right? And one of the things we're all using it for is cleaning. So it's important to understand that PFAS are not easily absorbed through the skin. That if your skin has cuts or abrasions and if you have lacerations in your skin and your PFAS levels are quite high, you might want to look for opportunities to cover up those exposed wounds. But other than that, routine cleaning of dishes and washing, continuing to use your water, if it has PFAS is fine. Certainly you might want to consider using bottled water if you're cleaning really sensitive objects like dentures or baby bottles for children, and certainly brushing your teeth. There's nothing inherently risky about brushing your teeth with PFAS water, but there is a real potential for swallowing water if you're brushing your teeth. So we want to be mindful of that, again, especially with children. Certainly, any dishes washed with PFAS don't present a health risk, so there's no long-term risk if you're cleaning your dishes with PFAS. I think an intuitive question is, well, is the PFAS going to stay on the dish? Can I continue to use the dish? And you can continue to use your flatware and cookware. Another question we routinely get is about showering or bathing in the home, especially if your water is contaminated. And for those of you with young children at home, can I put them in the tub? Can I continue to wash the children? So we've put together some guidelines here that are a bit specific to the types of people using the bathroom. And you might wonder why that is. Largely, it's a product of, it's really difficult to teach young children, as many as you know, to not swallow water when they're in the shower or when they're in the tub. So this assumes that young children will drink some of the water. So young children means children that in your estimation, you've not yet, they're not mature enough and they're not developed enough to understand not to drink the water in the shower or the tub. So we would recommend that children, you reconsider using water in the shower or bath for young children if it's greater than 500 nanograms per liter. And again, the level of drinking water that you would receive a notice saying that the water is unsafe is 20. So this is a fair amount there. For older children, so children that you have convinced to not open their mouth or drink the water in the shower, certainly 1,300 nanograms per liter would be a safe level. And then adults, and adults can be older teenagers as well. So we're really interested in this developmental period, adults being fully developed young men, young women. That level would be greater than 3,500 nanograms per liter. So again, PFAS, just like we talked about when cleaning dishes or cleaning your hands in the sink, they're not readily absorbed through the skin. So it's not really a dermal absorption issue. But again, limit your time in the shower or the bathtub if you do have lacerations or cuts or abrasions in your skin. Everyone should avoid ingesting water in the shower or tub. You might consider modifying your behavior to the extent you can. I know I would be less conscious about that in a shower, worrying about if I get water in my mouth. But if your water at home does have PFAS, you may just be conscious of that. And certainly monitor children for their tub if there is PFAS. So the same is almost true when swimming, is that typical contact while swimming in water with levels of PFAS. So I understand that Crocker Pond is a public beach here in Westminster, and Crocker Pond has some measurable levels of PFAS. I will say there are many water bodies in Massachusetts. Both of our agencies, EPH and MassDEP, have done surveillance of rivers, streams, ponds, lakes across Massachusetts. In that regard, Crocker Pond doesn't stand out as a water body with high levels of PFAS. It's sort of consistent with some other areas we've done. We just released information on state parks in Massachusetts and some state parks that are not really associated with any known PFAS contamination. We see some PFAS levels in those state parks as well. And what we advise people when there is PFAS in the water body is we advise who's ever operating in a water body, whether it be a municipality or the Department of Conservation and Recreation, another state agency that runs state parks. When there's PFAS in the water, let people know there's PFAS in the water so that children, when using the water body, parents can monitor their kids, make sure they're not gulping the water. We all know that people swim differently than they drink water, right? You spend less time in Crocker Pond than you do drinking water from your tap. So certainly the duration and magnitude of exposure is much less. I know from levels that I've been coordinating with MassDEP on from the last summer, there's no levels in Crocker Pond that I'm currently aware of that would preclude any swimming ban. So certainly it's safe to swim in a water body with PFAS. You just want to make sure that really young children are not drinking the water. You want to make sure you're sort of following the recommendations for using that water. In terms of food, growing food, your own produce and irrigating it with PFAS contaminated water, there's not a lot of information specifically on that. There's a lot of factors that go into the ability of a plant in the plant tissue to accumulate PFAS that's in the water or soil. And those data are just not available for all the different food types and all the different types of soil available. So some of you, if you're gardening at home and you have certain produce, I would recommend you consider using raised beds and know where that soil was procured, that you're growing vegetables that you intend to eat. Make sure to the extent possible you're using water that you know doesn't have PFAS. If you're collecting rainwater or you have other ways to irrigate, it's just because of the uncertainty associated with some of that PFAS. Certainly, there's no concerns if you're growing perennials or flowers, if you want to water plants with that water. But if you're growing large vegetable gardens and procuring some of those vegetables, and especially feeding them to your children, we just don't have a lot of information on what levels of PFAS would look like, different types of food that you might be offering your family. As a general rule, PFAS, I will say, does not follow any general rules. But I will say, because I'm a toxicologist, and any of you that are gardening, I think this is good advice, that many times contamination from gardens accumulates on the outside of the plants, not within the tissue of the plants. That's certainly true for heavy metals and other soil. So I always recommend, if you're unsure about where your soil is from, and you've made the decision you're going to eat the food, cut off the tops and bottoms of the vegetables, especially tubers like carrots or potatoes, peel them thoroughly and clean off cut off the outside, skin them to the extent you can. For many things, that reduces a lot of the risk. But again, what I'm saying with respect to PFAS, we just don't know. When I measure PFAS in fish, it acts differently than when I measure metals in fish. So other scientists have seen the same thing. So we don't have this all figured out yet. But what I can tell you is, when growing vegetables in your garden, you really want to make sure that you limit your exposure to contaminants in the soil by making sure those vegetables are really clean and then giving yourself the opportunity to remove any of the chemicals that might be on the outside of the vegetable. So some best practices: use alternative sources of water, again, some raised beds, and then wash all your fruits and vegetables and peel the root vegetables. Other ways to limit your exposure. So one of the things we always recommend to people in communities where they know they've had at least one source of known PFAS contamination is, now you're mindful of that, you're mindful of PFAS exposure. There are other things you can do to reduce exposure to all PFAS. And one of those things is to read some labels on consumer products like cookware that you might be purchasing, especially if you're purchasing it from discount retailers, right? I know a number of years ago when we did away with BPA water bottles, there were certain retailers all over, especially in the Ocean State, Rhode Island. I'm not going to name any names of retailers, but you could see certain products that popped up in these stores when they were no longer being offered in the main, you know, the big box retailers. I think that's an opportunity for you to look at products now and at least make an informed decision if you want to purchase a product that might have certain PFAS in it. Largely, they're being phased out of products, but that's one way to limit exposure. Look for textiles that say that they're treated with stain protection. Things like that new sofa, new carpeting. Ask the question of the retailer, what's in this? And also, you know, this is a tried and true strategy for reducing exposure to contamination. And we do this a lot with families with young children that are unfortunately lead poisoned. And we know that if people live near lead contaminated sites, an incredibly effective way to reduce exposure to dust and contamination is to literally just wipe down surfaces in the home. Start to have strategies like taking your shoes off when you come into the home, wiping down multiple accessible surfaces that children might access. I'm sure you all keep a clean house, but I want to underscore that that really has some exposure reducing benefits to make sure if you see to regularly clean the home for dust, not only for hygienic reasons, but it can really cut down on potential exposure. PFAS in pets, as you know, as we all know, your companion animals. This is a beautiful area of the state. Some of you might have livestock. Certainly, many of you will have cats and dogs and things like that. Cats and dogs and companion, you know, livestock. They're not humans, and the levels of PFAS exposure that these animals can be exposed to, it's sort of unknown. The regulatory levels we have are for humans. What I can tell you is all those animals live much shorter lifespan than humans, so likely they can be exposed to a higher level. I wouldn't be concerned about your companion animals if their levels were slightly above the PFAS levels. I wouldn't expect that if you're offering your animals water that was above 20 nanograms per liter, that I would expect any adverse health effects. But just something to be advised that there's not a whole lot of guidance values on that. If you are concerned about it, certainly talk to your vet and certainly use every opportunity to offer your animals clean, fresh water if you have access. Because we have a slide, and this is on the heels of a pandemic, and also, you know, young children require a lot of vaccinations. There is no reason why children exposed to PFAS shouldn't proceed with the same vaccination schedule recommended by their pediatrician. We have no evidence to suggest that the COVID vaccine is not effective in people that have been exposed to PFAS. PFAS exposure is associated with a decreased antibody response, and we've seen that in certain animal studies. What that means specifically for humans and their response to antibodies is unclear right now. We don't know what that means, but we do recommend that children proceed with their vaccination schedule. And again, if you have any concerns, certainly talk to your medical provider about that. But we do think the vaccines will continue to be effective. There's alleged that there is certain reduced effectiveness of those vaccines, but that is certainly not a reason to preclude you from offering children vaccines or proceeding with your own vaccines, including COVID boosters and things like that. So some links up here, certainly how to reach me at my office, the DPH toxicology at statema.us. You could also just email dphtoxicology@mass.gov, and certainly my colleagues at DEP can answer many of the same questions. At this point, Andrea, should I take questions now or should we hold them until the end?
Hold it again.
Hold them to the end. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. So, you have the
No, you're on board.
you have the information about PFAS. The question is why we're talking about PFAS here in Westminster. So what happened? Here's the question. In 1987, we have to go back that far, the town and MassDEP approved a commercial composting operation at 65 Forest Hill Road. That property is owned by an entity called Otter Farm Inc. And the composting operation was operated by Massachusetts Natural Fertilizer, Mass Natural. Otter Farm is actually controlled by a paper company. Seaman Paper Company operates a paper mill in Templeton. We issued permits from 1987 all the way up until October of 2020. It was the last permit we issued for that facility. That permit expires in 2025. So the operations, the composting operations at Mass Natural are licensed by MassDEP. Under the permit we issued, Mass Natural can bring in what we call source separated organic materials. Those materials are used to make compost and different kinds of soil products. Under the current permit, what they can bring in are solids from the wastewater treatment process at Seaman Paper and some other paper mills, food waste, and we know currently on site the kind of food waste they have: the tea leaves, lettuce, and potato chips, leaf and yard waste, manure, cannabis roots, and solids from municipal wastewater treatment facilities. The facility's been operating this way for 35 years. What happened is in February of last year, a homeowner who bought the property tested their private well for PFAS and notified MassDEP that the PFAS levels were over 1,300 parts per trillion. MassDEP immediately provided the homeowner with bottled water. We took water samples from that home and from the homes within 500 feet of that home. We also very quickly realized in just looking at the site that it was next to this composting facility that we regulate. So we contacted Mass Natural and Otter Farm and said, you need to take over this investigation. You need to manage the cleanup. You're responsible for the cleanup. That includes testing private wells and the entire ongoing investigation and the ultimate remediation and solving the problem. Mark Wally is going to talk in more detail about all of that. We also told Mass Natural and Otter Farm to sample what was on the site. And that's how we know the kinds of food waste that's there. On the basis of that sampling and the levels that we found, in July of last year, we suspended that permit to operate. They weren't bringing anything in that wasn't approved in the permit. Everything that is there was listed in the permit, but the permit also says that you can't operate in a manner that causes a threat to public health. So clearly, the facility was causing a threat to public health through groundwater contamination, and that's grounds for suspending the permit, and that's what we did. It's kind of hard to argue that the operations are not causing a threat to public health environment, but the companies did appeal the order, which is their legal right to do. And technically, while the appeal is pending, the permit is still in effect. But we've been told, and I think it's true, they stopped operating when we issued the order, and they haven't started back up. So since July, the facility has not been operating, although during the course of the appeal, they could be. So that's the background information that I think you need to have. Up here, the release tracking number is the way that the cleanup is tracked through our database, and there are a couple of different ways you can get information. We're going to talk about it a little bit later, but the release tracking number, if you go to DEP's website, is the way that you would be able to look it up, and you can see every single piece of paper, including records of email conversations back and forth. So when you go in under that file number to the DEP file viewer, it's a little daunting to see how much information is there, because it's literally all of the information is there. And we asked the responsible parties to make a separate website that they manage, and it puts the most important paper, the most recent information and reports up there so that it's easier to access than our website. And making no representation that the responsible party's website is the place that you should go for all your information. It's a place that, as part of the public involvement activities that we've been speaking with them about, we thought would be easier for people to access some of the information. That's the very easy to remember address. It's westminsterpfas.com. So you can go to that website. So Mark talked about the regulatory landscape at DEP for how we regulate PFAS. And I just want to take a little minute just to explain how we got to, because this is something we call an emerging contaminant. This is new. We didn't start regulating in Massachusetts PFAS until late 2019 and then mid 2020. So for public water systems are those systems that serve 25 or more people every day for 60 or more days per year. Certain public water systems back in 2013 had to start looking for PFAS in them. EPA does this every 5 years, comes up with lists. They want public water suppliers to look for things to see, are they in the environment? Are they in drinking water? And if they are, should we regulate them on a national level? So in 2013, they started looking for PFAS and they found PFAS pretty much everywhere. So in 2016, based on that information, the federal government issued what is a health advisory. And that's just what it says. It's advice. It's not a regulation. And that regulation was 70 parts per trillion for the two specific PFAS compounds that Mark mentioned, the PFOA and the PFAS. So you add those two up and it was over 70. That was what the federal government established as its health advisory for drinking water. Our scientists at DEP were following that efforts from around the world, because PFAS is actually a worldwide problem, and taking off from those efforts, MassDEP came up with our own enforceable standards. This is not advice. These are regulations for cleanup standards in soil and groundwater. We came up with the level in 2019, and for groundwater specifically, it's 20 parts per trillion for the 6 combined that Mark showed on his slide, those 6. The soil standards are different in that each one of the 6 has its own number. And then shortly thereafter, our drinking water program issued an enforceable drinking water standard for public water suppliers. And obviously it's the same, 20 parts per trillion. Whether it's a contamination of groundwater, whether it's contamination in a public water system, it's still 20 parts per trillion. So it's important to remember, though, that when I'm talking about the drinking water standards, it's these public water systems, the ones that serve more than 25 people every day, not private wells. It's up to the boards of health, not the state, to regulate private wells if they choose to, and many towns do, but and Westminster is one of it. Some towns don't. DEP doesn't regulate private wells. We don't set standards for private wells, but we regulate the sources of contamination in private wells if there's contamination in private wells. We won't require a property owner. We're not going to tell you, you have to test your private well for certain things. But if you test a private well and there's contamination in it, we will require the people responsible for that contamination to clean it up and also to mitigate any exposure through the bottled water or water treatment systems. The law that gives us the authority to do all this is Chapter 21E of the general laws. And so we just refer to the whole program as 21E, and that's an acronym I just can't avoid. There's no other way to say it except Chapter 21E. So under the 21E program, I've underlined some of the important words that a site with a capital S is anywhere where the contamination has come to be located. The owners, operators, people who brought hazardous materials there, people who arranged for the hazardous materials to go there, are all responsible for cleaning it up to a standard that we call a condition of no significant risk. There's a timeline that Mark's going to talk about that it's about a 6-year time to get from start to finish. So it's important to remember that a site is not the property. The site is not MassDEP. The site is everywhere the contamination from MassDEP has come to be located. And we haven't fully defined the site yet. The responsible parties are working on that through the investigations that they're doing. But we are not at this part in the process yet where the site has been fully described. So under 21E, those people, those owners, operators, persons who arrange for, persons who's transported, are responsible without regard to fault for the costs of the cleanup and also for property damage caused by the release. And this might sound kind of unfair that DEP doesn't go and do all these cleanups, that we find people and make them do the cleanups, but if it didn't work that way, if it wasn't this strict liability without regard to fault standard, the sites just wouldn't get cleaned up. So we don't have to prove that you did something, that there was something specific bad that happened. If you hear about people who are buying property and they do a 21E report on it, they're doing a site investigation to make sure they're not buying contaminated property, because if you buy it, it's your problem to clean up. It's strict liability. So in this case, as in all our 21E cases, the responsible parties are liable jointly and severally without regard to fault. Joint and several means each one of them owns 100% of the problem. So one person can clean it all up, or they can all clean it all up and divide the costs among themselves. But as far as the Commonwealth is concerned, each one of them is 100% responsible. And if we had to do the cleanup and do cost recovery, we could go after any or all of them. And when we do a cleanup and have to cost recover, we get to recoup 3 times the taxpayer's cost for having to do that. So in this case, the responsible parties are doing the cleanup. So that's great. And whether they have any kind of separate agreement among themselves to divide up the costs, I don't know, and it doesn't really matter, because the law also provides that any agreements among responsible parties cannot do away with their liability to the state. When we find the responsible parties, we issue what's called a notice of responsibility, and that tells them we have identified you as one of these groups, owners, operators, generators. You have to hire a licensed site professional like Ms. Bader. You have to hire this person who's licensed by the state to conduct the investigation and the cleanup. So far, we've issued notices of responsibilities for this site to Mass Natural, Otter Farm, Seaman Paper, 2 other paper companies who generate material brought to the site, and another ownership entity that owns 44 Forge Hill Road, where some of the material is stored. So that's a lot of legal stuff, I know, but it's important to understand exactly what the responsibilities are and the roles here, where DEP has the regulations that allow us to set the way in which the cleanup and investigation are conducted, but the responsible parties are responsible. That's what the word is. You are responsible for the investigation. You're responsible for providing mitigation to any exposure, and you're responsible for the ultimate cleanup. We'll let Mark dive into all of the details. Mark's going to introduce our PFAS team as well.
Okay, good evening. Mary Jude said, my name is Mark Wally. I'm the Deputy Regional Director for the Bureau of Waste Site Cleanup in MassDEP Central Regional Office. Tonight I have with me our dedicated PFAS team of geologists, hydrogeologists, environmental scientists. You guys can stand up. We have Rachel Stevens, Agriculture, Paul Vigil. Been working on the site for the past year. Many of you probably have spoken with some of us. I'm sure there are many people that have spoken with Rachel. She's fielded probably hundreds of calls for a variety of concerns. My presentation tonight, I'm going to talk about a little bit about the cleanup process, and then more specifically about giving an update on what's been going on at the site since we were here last June. So in Massachusetts, we have a semi-privatized cleanup process that relies on licensed site professionals. These are environmental professionals with a related degree, a certain number of years making field decisions, and have passed the licensing exam. The LSPs conduct the assessment and the remediation. DEP's role is to make sure that the cleanup is conducted in accordance with the Massachusetts contingency plan, the cleanup regulations. With this site, MassDEP has been actively engaged in reviewing and approving plans and reports, and we will continue to do that. So as is the case for this MNF site, contamination in a private well requires an immediate response action to eliminate, prevent, or mitigate that contamination in the private well. These actions can include provisions of bottled water, providing well treatment, or connecting to public water if it's available and feasible. The Massachusetts contingency plan, which are the cleanup regulations, are very flexible. They're designed to cover all types of spills and releases, from a 10-gallon gasoline spill on the highway to a home heating oil fuel spill in somebody's basement to a complex industrial site. This allows simple sites to clean up quickly and gives the more complex sites time to gather the information they need to develop an appropriate cleanup plan. The MNF site is a complex site. So this slide explains the cleanup process timeline. The life cycle of a disposal site starts with notification or site discovery. The first priority is to identify any direct exposure contaminants and eliminate or mitigate that exposure, such as in the case of private well contamination. And that's where the potentially responsible parties for MNF have been putting all of their effort, not all of their effort, but most of their effort this past year. After the first year, a phase 1 initial site investigation report is submitted. That provides all the data that's collected about the site over that past year. And then the responsible parties have 3 years to complete phase 2 comprehensive site assessment, which looks at all the sources, the extent of contamination, what kind of contamination is, where it's come to be located, and what the risks to human health, safety, public welfare, and the environment are. After that, they have a year to come up with a plan that looks at all the different types of cleanup technologies and pick one. That's the phase 3. At the same time, they submit a phase 4 remedy implementation plan that says, this is how we're going to use that particular cleanup technology at this site. And then after that, they have another year to either submit a permanent solution statement, which is a closure report for the site, or it goes into a long-term cleanup mode. So for the Mass Natural site, MassDEP has required that any detection in a private well that's below the drinking water standard, the homes are provided with bottled water. If it's above the drinking water standard of 20 parts per trillion, then a well treatment system is provided, a point of entry treatment system. And we also required that from every detection of PFAS in a private well, that the responsible parties go out and test any other private wells within 500 feet. When we were here at Oakmont last June, the responsible parties had requested access to sample 186 properties, and 83 wells had already been sampled. The residential wells, the highest concentration was 324 parts per trillion. And the highest concentration detected in a well is actually the Mass Natural Fertilizers, their own drinking water well, where they detected 5,700 parts per trillion. At the time, the parties were providing the bottled water. They had already installed 21 point of entry treatment systems for homes where they had over 20 parts per trillion PFAS 6. And of course, they had to continue to sample Again, going out 500 feet from every detection. So here we are a year later. At this point, the responsible parties have requested access to sample 317 residential wells, and they've sampled 265 wells. The highest concentration of private well came in at 2,900 parts per trillion, and they've installed 172 treatment systems for homes where the PFAS 6 exceeded the 20 part per trillion drinking water standard. This is a major response by the responsible parties. Although there've been, a few challenges along the way. In my 30 years with MassDEP, I don't think I've ever seen such a concentrated effort to identify and treat so many properties in such a short time. So here's a comparison of the well sampling results that we had last year compared to this year. Last year, there were 62 wells that had concentrations exceeding 90 parts per trillion, which is the level that MassDEP considers to be an unacceptable short-term risk, known as an imminent hazard. That's compared to 115 wells today. Last year, we only had 9 wells that were above the drinking water standard, but below that imminent hazard level number. Today, we have 52. There were 6 wells last year that were below the drinking water standard. Now we have 38. Last year, there were only 2 wells that had no PFAS in them. This year, we have 51. So hopefully we're getting closer to the edges of the private well contamination. And this slide shows the results of the sampling last year. The map on the left is from last year. The map on the right is the current map showing the sampling results. The green properties are no detection of PFAS. The yellow properties are detections where PFAS is below the 20 parts per trillion standard. Red is above 20 parts per trillion, and the pink are above the 90 parts per trillion imminent hazard threshold. So you can see that it spreads up along Bean Porridge Hill Road all the way up to Route 12, and then goes down south through the neighborhoods downhill from Mass Natural and along South Ashburnham Road. So to determine if there were locations to focus on some source control, and we also required a plan to control migration of groundwater to surface water. Soil borings were advanced and test pits were excavated to collect soil samples. Monitoring wells were installed to collect groundwater samples, and the assessment found widespread application of compostable materials on hay fields, and across the property, probably somewhere estimated between 10 and 30 acres of contaminated soil at the site. All the soil borings, pretty much 24 out of 27 samples had at least one PFAS compound that exceeded the residential cleanup standard. The groundwater sampling found that the concentrations on site range from 56 parts per trillion up to 48,000 parts per trillion in one well known as MW5, which was near a pile, I believe, of finished compost product. That's the highest concentration we've had in the groundwater so far. So, excuse me? 48,000 parts per trillion. Excuse me? On site in a monitoring well on that Mass Natural fertilizer site. So based upon the results of the soil sampling, the water sampling, the responsible parties came up with a source control plan that looked at 11 different remedial alternatives, and they selected a construction of a large storage building for the stockpiled material on site. That's really beyond an immediate response action. The migration control plan looked at 6 different alternatives, and they selected groundwater pump and treat to control migration of groundwater. That's going to take a little bit more assessment to figure out groundwater flow, gradients, and pumping rates, that kind of thing. At the same time, last December, the party submitted a stockpile covering plan. There are 16,000 cubic yards of material that's stockpiled on the site. The largest piles contain 800 to 900 cubic yards. For comparison, a dump truck is generally about 10 cubic yards, so you can do the math. The plan didn't consider covering the piles to be an effective measure because the soil contamination was so high at the site. They didn't consider that to be effective to reduce leaching into the groundwater. MassDEP disagreed, and in March, we required them to cover all the stockpiles on site by this August. And to my understanding, that's well underway. Oops. Uh-oh. So just last week, MassDEP issued an immediate response letter that requires the groundwater pump and treat design by July 13th, which is the next immediate response action status report due date. We also approved a bench scale test for some remedial additives. But most importantly, rather than waiting another 4 years for the phase 3 remedial action plan, we, MassDEP, the PRPs, you all know that construction of a public water line is really going to be necessary here. And based on the private well sample, we know it's going to go up Bean Forest Hill Road and up South Ashburnham Road. So we are requiring a conceptual water line design plan by July 13th with that next IRA status report, and then a detailed water line design plan by July 13th of 2024. Finally, MassDEP's received a copy of a public involvement plan petition, a PIP petition for the site. At this time, the public involvement group headed up by Deborah Hooper has been fortunate to have licensed site professional Sue Bader volunteer her time and expertise. A public involvement plan will ensure that the affected residents continue to have an opportunity to comment on reports and plans, apply for DEP grants to help pay for LSP services, and have a seat at the table. Now that the PIP petition's been submitted to the responsible parties, they have 80 days to draft a PIP plan and have a public meeting to present that to the petitioners. Meanwhile, Mass Natural Fertilizer will continue to maintain the Westminster PFAS website that has all the dates and times of public meetings, public comments and responses, and all the correspondence as Mary Jude had mentioned. So in summary, a huge amount of work has been performed by the responsible parties since last June to identify and mitigate drinking water exposures. We're now at a turning point where we're going to be focusing on the phase 2 comprehensive site assessment, but it's also time to get serious about planning for a water line. And that's where we're at. So with that, I turn it back over to Mary Jude.
Thanks, Mark. And I know we're running over time. We are more than happy to stay if people have questions, but part of having such a robust presentation is try to anticipate those questions so that hopefully you have a question and we perhaps addressed that already. I do want to acknowledge that Senator Goby has joined us. In the way back. Thank you for coming, and Representative Ferguson is on the Zoom call. I neglected to mention that at the beginning. I apologize. We've been working very closely with your legislative delegation and keeping them aware of the progress that's being made, and I know some of you have reached out to them, and we're happy to continue to provide them with as much information as they need to respond to you. So I think what we'll do is open it up for questions in the auditorium. If you could come to a microphone, we're going to ask that everybody asks one question only until everyone has had a chance to ask one question. And then if you have a repeat, you can come back. And if you're not a Westminster resident, to wait until all the residents here have had an opportunity to ask their questions before you ask the question. And Andrea is monitoring the Q&A for all the Zoom folks, and we'll try to feed those questions in. I think there's probably some overlap, so Zoom people, you may hear an answer to your question just as a result of somebody else here asking it. So we'll start off with the questions.
Hello, my question is about the testing and monitoring. After you need to test after that point? Yes. And if so, where can we find the results of that? Where can we find what the testing results are?
So we have a protocol that initially the treatment systems have sampled water coming in, going out. Monthly for the first quarter, and then quarterly for the first year. And then after that, Rachel, does it continue quarterly or?
The conversation, they're going to continue quarterly until there's further information, further data. See if that schedule is warranted or if it could be cut back.
So are you asking a question about your own specific, or are you asking if there's a repository of information about all tasks? Are you a Westminster resident?
Yes, I am. I'm on Woodland Drive.
Okay. So if your house is tested, you should be getting that information correct.
From where?
From the licensed professional from MassDEP fertilizer.
They should be sending us reports.
Should be sending me lab reports and notification.
So that's not controlled through your office.
No. But the information is available on our website.
So you should be getting it directly. If you want to, if Rachel, your name, address. To that. Thank you.
Going to Woodland Drive.
Yes, thank you for this really comprehensive presentation. I live on 148 South Ash, right on the shores of Harper Pond. I'm confused by, well, I'm kind of like still about that 44,380 parts per trillion in the well. That's kind of scary in terms of being on the hill, and I'm confused as to why the testing is not expanded on the other side of the pond, given the aquifers. And we know, I will personally say my husband has some significant health issues that started since we were here. I'm not saying that's connected, but I'm really concerned that the testing is not being expanded beyond 500 feet. And they're using Crocker Pond as sort of this arbitrary moat so that the other side is being tested. So I would request to know why that wouldn't be expanded, given the health effects that we are now finding with other people on the other side of the pond. So is there a reason scientifically that you would not do that, given the inordinate risk for people?
So I just want to, before Mark, so the right-hand side is the current map of where the levels are non-detect. The green shading, yellow is below 20, red is above 20, pink are above 90. So you can see next to Crocker Pond are the number in green. And Mark's going to talk about how we. I'll let Mark,
Okay.
I just want to make sure you can visually.
I mean, just water can travel across the pond, and down, sure, and to the other side.
Investigation for the stage 2 comprehensive.
I mean, I think that we heard it. That the site, the testing site be expanded.
We will.
Beyond 500 feet, which it seems to be arbitrary, again, with the level of aquifers, which you're not even sure, you know. Plus, I just want to point out, on the other side of the pond, it's a federal mining site. They've been blasting. So God knows what that's done to the aquifers. So and just to be on record, they wanted to be drilling of homes on the contaminated site. So we have a well, or this, that's 44,000, over 44,000 parts per trillion. I just am, as a physician, I'm kind of speechless. Like that wouldn't be expanded. That's all I wanted, and to just understand why it wouldn't be. Yeah, that's my question.
At this point, there aren't any private wells within 500 feet of those.
I understand, but that you're using the pond is an arbitrary one.
And ponds and lakes often do intercept contamination, but your point is.
And it is contaminated. The other question I had is, my understanding, but I'm not a scientist, and I appreciate your knowledge. I've heard, and there's so much information on PFAS, it's daunting. It's like a fifth job that we're all dealing with. Is PFAS a heavy chemical? Like, does it drop to the pond? Like, how is this spreading across the pond? I just am very concerned that the pond is known contaminated. And that's an artificial. And just because there isn't a houseboat, like obviously the water is going to travel. So that's what I don't know if that makes sense. And we know that there's people that.
Not wrong.
Okay.
And that is an area that will have to be investigated for the stage 2, because they have to determine the extent. It's not unreasonable to conjecture that PFAS may be migrating onto the pond. There are no wells, and we usually cross the pond there. But they will have to determine the extent, whether it should travel through or under the pond.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and we, part of the community response action plan, the responsible parties are sampling in Crocker Pond, and during swimming season, they're sampling every month. So the
No,
data-
I understand that.
I'm just, I want people to understand that there is data for Crocker Pond. If you're concerned about levels in Crocker Pond, you can find that data on the website. I just want to ask if anybody else has a question.
Yeah, no,
I understand you have
that's
more,
good.
but I want to give other people an
Yeah,
opportunity.
thank you.
Hi, good evening. Michael Ferris, 32 White Pine Drive. I kind of gave you a preliminary of my question, but the record that might be given. I live at 32 White Pine Drive. I think initial PPT was 458 or something. I was getting very sick until I stopped there. I'm having some symptom issues. I also have to consider my health conditions in other areas that I'm not feeling very well. Okay. And I understand recently the town of Westminster has extended the well moratorium for an additional 6 months. So I'm going to probably have 2 parts question or statement, but the first part of the question is, could you please describe to us why a well moratorium might make sense right now, considering all of the information you guys just provided us here, where you don't have all the data. There's still analysis going on. There's new numbers coming out. So I'd like an answer why a well moratorium would make sense. And then the second part of my question is, I would like an answer why the town of Westminster has authorized 2 wells to be drilled in the moratorium zone, when one of those wells will be next to my property and endanger me, my well, and my safety of my family and my pets and the things I love. And I want to understand how the town of Westminster has any accountability to making these decisions. And the person that lives right next to the contamination zone is involved in handling lawsuits related to this, where he has affiliations with the lawyers involved with those lawsuits. I expect my public safety to be paramount, as just as every other one of these residents in this community. And if that well is drilled next to my home, there will be accountability. That's all I have to say.
Thank you for coming tonight. I'm Tim Masters and I live in 13 Woodland Drive. And my question is, since there's so many materials that were brought up to Mass Natural, has anyone looked into which materials are actually responsible for causing the PFAS contamination?
I'm not sure, I asked Doug to bring his whole file, I'm not gonna you know, from the sampling that happened, at the site of all the various, from different stockpiles. The responsible party sampled all of the piles. All of the piles except the potato chips. The potato chips had some levels of PFAS in them. So all of the various materials have some level of PFAS. Again, PFAS is in everything, including the tea leaves, including the lettuce. So you know, it's in everything that's up there. We do have data that show respective levels in the different piles. There's compost, it's finished cooking, would have been for sale. There's intermediate product. There's piles that have just been put together, so you can kind of still see one is this product and the other is this product. So there are all these different various mixtures and finished products and raw materials stockpiled, and they're all different. So it's not something that you can say this one is the problem. They're all, exception of the chips, some levels of PFAS, different kinds of PFAS.
And there's no plan to truck those substances off-site.
The plan right now is to cover them up. I mean, it's an iterative process that Mark was describing, and we're going to need to report the source control plan.
How is that going to help anything with groundwater, covering it up?
So can I just finish addressing this? And if you wanted to ask a question, you could come up to the microphone. That would be really helpful. So there's a part of the plan that involves building, but then the source control does have to be addressed as part of the cleanup plan. Can you leave it there? Leave it there in some different state. That's part of it. Do you want to add to that?
Thank you. And I apologize, I don't think I actually really got an official answer though, that, you know, what are the benefits of having the well moratorium and why is the state not stopping these two specific wells? I would just like that as public comment. Thank you.
Comment or question?
Question, sorry, answer.
Okay, so the question about why is the town authorizing anything, obviously, DEP can't do. The question about the well moratorium, as I said, we don't regulate private wells, so we have no opinion on whether there should be more wells, no wells. We just don't have an opinion on that. If there's construction, including construction of a well, it's happening on a property within a site, as the site currently looks, then that does have to be managed under Chapter 21E and should have an LSP overseeing all the materials from that well construction.
So I keep getting phone calls even today, not necessarily, but like, you know, currently about the soil that people may have on their property, whether it's in their gardens, their lawns, what have you. Some people have it sitting on their driveway just because they don't know what to do with it. So what do you suggest I tell them? I keep suggesting they call you, but we can put something out there that we can, you know, let everyone know. And then secondly, can you just update everybody on 44 Moon Gorge? Thank you.
So we've had the question about, I purchased compost from Mass Natural and it's in my yard. We've had that question since the beginning. And what we suggest that people would have Mass Natural come and test it. It's part of the ongoing site activities. Mass Natural could do that if you requested. They could decline. If you are going to manage that soil in some way, there was a property owner who was replacing a septic system, digging up the dirt that may have been part of the construction of the house, may have been soil that was brought as topsoil to property. That soil was tested, or we just stockpiled. It was stockpiled on site, and if it was going to go off site, we were going to ask for it to be characterized, but it ended up being reused on the site. So right now, without any additional evidence of contamination in that specific soil, not just because it came from Mass Natural, but if you have contamination, it's already, the property's already part of the site. So I'm not sure what it would add to having everybody test the soil in their yards who is part of the site already. And Mark Nascarello, other Mark was saying that there are precautions, there are steps you can take if you are gardening.
I was getting
Um, Nothing I can offer to people in other towns. Did you have a second question, Deborah? 44, thank you. So across the road at 44 Bean Porch, we discovered that there are materials stockpiled there. And we just, this week, this Friday, issued a notice of responsibility to I don't know, thank you, who is the property owner for 44, but is affiliated with the other parties. It's a new legal entity, but it's not a people. So we are looking into conditions at 44 Bean Porch.
Hi, Peggy Masters, 13 Woodland Drive. I'd like to expand a little bit on my husband's question. I know you said that there were a lot of materials that ended up, at the fertilizer place. Have they been traced back? Like, so there's potato chips. Did they get traced back to the manufacturer to see if there's anything in their product line that could have caused it? And actually, each of the items that were found there, were they also tested? Like gone back on, wherever they came from, to their origin?
Let me be clear, the potato chips did not have PFAS.
I'm sorry. Oh, I thought you said they did.
Potato chips were the only thing that did not.
Oh, that did not. Okay. But anything else that you found here? I mean, was there a trace back to see the origin?
Not as part of the cleanup. I don't know.
Well, just part of the problem.
The Mass Natural Fertilizer did provide the names of the sources of who provided the materials. I don't believe we contacted any of those people directly to find out about their processes. But we do know where the different feedstock materials came from.
I would think that'd be important because it could be going out. I mean, everybody is getting contaminated. So if you don't find the sources, that was
Again, to Mark's description of how you can find PFAS in everything. The potato chips at the site don't have PFAS in them, but I bet you the greaseproof bag that the potato chip goes in
absolutely.
has PFAS in it. Waterproof mascara, dental floss.
It's just that disgusting because
It's hard.
if you take it off the market,
It's really hard.
And
it's definitely, the legislature convened last year, a PFAS task force to look at the myriad of issues, including, protective gear that firefighters are wearing that has PFAS. And things like just banning the distribution of PFAS containing materials in the state. Just a wide variety of issues, just like you're raising. There are just so many things when you start poking at it. So that issue is being looked at on a statewide basis. Those issues, I should say, multiple issues. But Andrew, did you want to feed in anything from the chat?
No, we don't have any questions pending in the Q&A right now. The only feedback I am getting is if residents, when you're asking questions, could really get up close to the mic so that the Zoom audience can hear. Thank you.
And apparently the LSP for the site, his name is Larry Lazard, is on the chat for health reasons, could not be here tonight, but he is participating through the webinar. Okay.
Hi, Chris Solo, 130 Beanport Hill Road. Mark, Mary, Jude, we've spoken before. Mr. Lassard accused me of mischaracterizing or misrepresenting, I believe, with the terms. It was 107 days between the last water sampling that I had in the concrete. I should just want to add that. With regard to the POET systems, we saw a number of failures over the summer during the drought. So my question is twofold. Again, I'm not sure exactly what I was mischaracterizing or misrepresenting, excuse me, when I brought this to your attention. One is the UV filtration as a potential source of causing this breakthrough contamination. And the other one is the drought. Can you comment?
Sorry, what was the second?
The drought. Over the summer, we had a number of systems that tested above 20 parts per trillion that POET systems installed. Could you comment on whether or not this is a result of the UV sterilization? And if so, should these systems be disconnected? Because again, considering it's been 107 days between the last set of results I had, considering I already have kidney cancer, I'm very concerned about drinking an elevated level of PFAS and winding up having to go through the hell I've been through already with the first bout of cancer. Thank you.
A long time back.
There's a lot.
Rachel, you address that?
I don't specifically know anything about your house. I don't have the data in front of me, so I can't speak to that. The UV.
Why don't you just go to the phone? So let me just say while Rachel's getting situated, that the issue of the UV was brought to our attention. It is something that we've looked into. Rachel can talk about what the current status is, but I don't know if we have any information about what effects the drought would be having. That's been something that we've talked about at least tonight.
Yeah, I don't have any information on your specific POET system and how it relates to the drought conditions. I can tell you that the UV bulb that everybody has is not actually associated with reducing the PFAS in your water. The UV bulb actually is associated with reducing any bacteria that might generate in the carbon filters.
In the last public comment, I believe we suggested that this could have been the source of they were improperly installed, thus causing this increased level we were seeing. So again, I'm trying to figure out, was it just because we had lesser volumes of water in the aquifer, therefore we're raising the concentration of PFAS? Was it this UV sterilization system? Again, just curious as to what might have been the cause of that, because again, mine was fine, fortunately, but there were a number of instances here where people were, having breakthrough contamination. So I just want to know what, what potentially could be the cause of that.
Yeah, and so we're familiar with it, and it's something that we've been looking into. As Rachel said, we don't have the data here tonight. It's a hard question to answer without looking at what we have for information. And I don't think that we're going to be able to answer your question about whether it was related to the drought. We are aware of questions about defaults. Don't think anybody here last year said anything about things being improperly installed, but we will go back and look at the data and reach out.
Yeah, that was the last public comment. I read through that. You'll see that there was an entry that references that it could have been UV sterilization bulbs that were causing this increased level of PFAS. I'm just curious
Okay,
about that.
but we can go back, and I do know that this is an issue that was brought to our attention, and we appreciate that. But we'll go back when we have the benefit of all of our data to look into that and get back.
Okay, thanks.
Hello, Derek Virgili, 3 on the road. Quick question, who's responsible for the cleaning of the water bubbles that we receive? Is that the LSD or is it the water company?
We spoke to the LSP about and into the water coolers, we confirm that the vendor will be cleaning those coolers at according to the manufacturer's instructions. They should be, you know, starting that now because apparently they're supposed to be cleaned once a year. So, if you have a treatment system that's a year old, water cooler, I mean, you might want to contact Mass Natural or Larry Masar, talk to them about having a vendor come out and clean your water cooler.
Since nobody else is out there, another question, as far as the public water being run, I assume that the responsible party is gonna eat the cost to tie it into the house also, right?
That's correct.
Okay, and one more question about that. Once that's connected, I heard that our well will be capped, is that true as well?
In these kinds of cases, the well is usually decommissioned because you don't want someone to sell the house and then the new buyer decides they would rather use the well, so the wells will be decommissioned.
What about like irrigation? Like, so now if we tie into city water, town water, like our water will be improved, whereas before it was run off our well water, we basically paid for electricity to run the pump. So is there no way that we could just have the drinking water tied into the water supply, the town water, and our wells tied to the filtration system that exists, and have the responsible party continue to maintain the filtration system?
Typically, that hasn't been the case in sites where we've installed a water line. As you said, usually the wells are decommissioned. Some of these wells have very high levels, and it would be difficult to maintain treatment system definitely purposes of irrigation. If the concentrations are you know, relatively low, the licensed site professional may be able to form a risk characterization to show that it doesn't pose a risk, but
It would absolutely have to be disconnected from the home. There couldn't be any,
Right.
you could not have any connection to the home, but I don't even think hypothetically this is the time to talk about it. I can tell you based on a number of sites where we've done this, the wells.
Yeah, I'm just saying that, like, we're all going to incur an additional cost because of this, like, you know, every quarter we get the water bill now that we never used to have. I don't know how much it's gonna cost, but, you know, if you're watering the lawn for an hour a day or so, like, you know.
Well, it's a whole different topic, but you shouldn't be watering your lawn in the.
Well, I mean, in the morning, whatever.
Just want to make sure people understand the whole concept of evapotranspiration. Don't water your lawn when it's a drought. Lawns are meant to go dormant. A brown lawn is okay. You've heard it from the DEP, okay?
Sure, I just have one other question.
I just make sure.
Right, yeah, please.
This gentleman asked a question. You're the gentleman.
Scott, you 11 Amber Road. Just back to what Mark said about the bids that go, not bids, but the preliminary designs. Does the preliminary has to be done by this July?
yes.
And then a year from that, is that the final one, and then you put it out to bid at that point, or?
Well,
Is
there's
it,
no,
it's going in at next July?
so right now, when we've determined where the water line needs to go,
Yeah,
then there will be able to be a design. Don't know anything about how the responsible parties would bid, how, I mean, it's not a public project, like a bidding process, the responsible parties, not the town, not the Commonwealth, not the city of Fitchburg. However they procure for design services and the construction contractor, up to them, so I don't really know, but right now, we don't know where the water line needs to go. And water lines are really not built with dead ends. It's not the most public health sensitive way to do it. They need to be looped in order to keep the water moving, because then create other water problems, water quality problems that have health effects. So we need to know what that ultimate layout looks like, or there would be an actual design that would sort of the things you would go out to get a construction contractor. But right now, we know enough about where the roads are to get a preliminary idea. Big part of that is going to be the elevation changes out here and how many pump stations you're going to need and where the pump stations. There's
because
a
it kind
lot.
of sounds like you have deadlines put on the design process of it, but it doesn't sound like you actually know where the system's gonna end.
We don't, not yet, but we will.
But everything's gonna get taken care of in 5 years and we'll have town water.
The idea, I mean,
That would be ideal.
I encourage,
Ideal, but I mean, it says 6 years to wrap this up. Can I sell my home with town water in 5 years?
if I had a crystal ball, I could answer, but I don't.
I guess.
We do have one question on the Zoom. The person didn't provide a specific address, but asks, I live on South Ashburnham Road. The town water line goes by my home. Will there be any assistance with the cost of tying into town water?
Did the person provide an address?
No, they did not.
Is it the end that's, what is that? Where the water.
Woodland Drive.
Woodland Drive?
I did ask already for them to share their specific address because I know that will impact the answer.
So, and I'm sorry, I'm putting Mark on the spot here, but there is a neighborhood that's, so the blue hatched area. Ravana, yeah.
Yeah.
Ravana, thank you. So the blue hatched area down the corner is where the Fitchburg water line comes in already, so there is town water there. There are homes that could be hooked up to that we have asked for that to happen.
Yeah, we
Yes,
did that last week. We said that those homes.
so where the water line from Ravana Road already is, we have asked for that to happen because that can happen now. Building a whole water line cannot happen. Yeah, but that's a good question. Thank you. We should have mentioned that. I do apologize for the lateness. It's just that it was, okay.
One quick one. John Miller, 227 Bean Forge Hill. That's my red spot. The first one a year ago, I had questions. Obviously contaminated. This question probably past the point, but we're talking about testing on what's on the site. We know the owners of that 300 acres own the paper mill. Templeton, you guys said. Do we know that the paper mills, were they dumping like their sludge and like bad stuff on that property for all these years? Like, I remember when I was a kid, I grew up in Leominster and they had a river called the Natural River. And there were paper mills in Fitchburg, and my parents would say, oh yeah, depending on the time of the week, it'd be like the water would be green or red because of all the stuff paper mills were dumping in the river. Is it like, did this paper mill buy this property and like decide to do this so they could, after those times, they couldn't dump in the river anymore? Say like, hey, let's buy some property out in the woods and we'll dump our sludge up here and mix it with some other stuff. And did you guys like, are the paper mills, were they like dumping all their bad stuff up here?
So I don't know what the intention of people who bought the property was. I mean, I can't speak to
So
that.
the stuff that you guys tested though,
I
like,
can tell you that, there's the solid sludgy product after the wastewater treatment at paper mills has been used as fertilizer, not even processed to turn into compost. But it has had approvals over the years to be land applied as fertilizer on farms. So it wasn't really there's a place for that to go that was a farming use. So this was a composting use. But I certainly cannot speak for Seaman Paper Company. But I can tell you that the paper sludge until now has been used as soil amendment on farms under state permitting.
okay, thank you.
So a quick follow-up question. The resident is at 61 South Ashburnham Road.
Is that the right end? Is that the right end?
Yeah, 61 is to the east.
Yeah.
It's, yeah, I can't tell which house that is, but yeah, it's on the east side.
So 61 is on the east side and would be connected.
We can reach out to the owner.
Owner, okay.
61.
We'll
Yeah.
reach out.
So I know it's a lot to come out at night and to listen to all of this, but I really appreciate that people take the effort. We're happy to come out and answer questions. We came out last year. We'll come out again. You're more than willing to take your questions, contact the people on the last slide that's up there. answer the questions that we can. A lot of the questions we're going to refer to the licensed site professional for the site. Because again, it's not piece cleanup, but we are overseeing the LSP and that cleanup. We will have the recording available. I think the last time we had it on MassDEP's YouTube channel. We're not sure that's the most accessible way to get it out there, so we're going to talk to the town about possibly having the recording available through the town's website. And we'll have slides available as well. Is there anything else, Adrian, missing?
No, I think that's it. Thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you very much for coming in.